Om Shanti. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome once more to our EGY session, the first for 2023. And of course, we greet everyone a new and blessed new year. Sister Denise, most welcome and thank you for another session on the power of thought. I was thinking while reading this, you have allowed us to think deeply and be more incisive and insightful about how we take care of our thoughts. We're going to read first the material that Sister Denise gave us. Okay, so we are going to start. But Sister Denise, would you like to say hello first?
Well, it is, I like to first of all join you in wishing everybody very, very happy New Year for 2023. And if you look at the news, you will see that it's starting with the crashing and banging, and California is having a big storm at the moment, and climate change is really with us. And I think that what we want to do together today with our work on the power of thought is to also look at how using the mind, using thought in ways to cause things to be stable and steady. I think that we can function as a kind of gyroscope to hold everything together. So I look forward very much to the session. So,
of course, I am sure many of us have read the material. It's, however, useful for us to read it again, review it, and then in the course of that, definitely there will be new insights that will come in. So we also read it as so that we start from the same page.
The power of thought. Thought produces vibrations and atmosphere around you and in the feelings of people in the vicinity. Thought also produces your sense of self, how you feel internally, your emotional temperature, and it determines whether you are confident in your power, affected or unaffected by what's going on around you. Even the slightest negative, weak, irrelevant, inappropriate, anxious, fearful, or ego-based thought changes your relationship with the world around you and determines whether or not circumstances are favorable or unfavorable. Raj Yoga provides detailed keys to the use and application of different types of thoughts, as well as methods to generate a pure and powerful mindset. This ensures a continuous flow of meaningful thought and feeling energy so that you can remain in your power and dance effectively to neutralize any and all energies and volitions that seek to diminish and deceive you. For this, you need to be continuously aware of the pre-thought feelings and triggers that still have power over you from deep traumas, karmic accounts, conditioning, addictions, and social attitudes that limit your freedom to be who you really are. This EGY will consider these subtle aspects of thought. Thought is produced by the soul and emerges from the mind, the intellect, and the sanskaras. Thought does not emerge only from the mind, but a combination of all three. There are different forms of thought: ideas, feelings, interpretation of perceptions, memories, assumptions, prejudices, emotions. Creative work, intellectual work, planning, calculation, and obsession are some forms of thought. Meditation is about concentration, using the power of choice and decision. Self-deception is an obstacle. Inaccurate interpretation of perceptions. The functioning of consciousness gets clouded by negative emotions that arise as a result of inaccurate interpretations of perception. This is due to lack of the power of discrimination. To interpret Raj Yoga in a religious or moral way is to remain in the body-conscious part of the confluence age. The confluence age is a period of time when two different forms of consciousness are superimposed one upon the other. Sometimes soul consciousness dominates, but mostly body consciousness is the dominant sense of self, and perceptions are interpreted according to religious and moral perspectives. It takes only a second to switch from one to the other. However, it requires much strength and clarity to remain in the soul-conscious position. This is because of the problem of ego. I think it is not useful to consider the 5 vices as vices. In India, there is much attraction to onomatopoeia, and many words get translated according to this principle. As a result, the translation can be faulty, incorrect, and misleading. Drama is such. The Hindi word is vikar. So vikar sounds like vice. Vikar is the beginning of the word vikarma. A vice is an addiction. And vice in English refers specifically to sexual malpractice. The Gita speaks of deception of sense perception. A sense perception goes directly to the mind, which is a subtle organ of perception, an interface between the 5 senses and the soul. Pleasure and pain are experienced in the soul, in particular in the mind. The senses have a practical function to help us protect the body against external circumstances that may cause damage to the body, such as heat and cold. You can tell whether food is fresh or rotten by the smell. However, Raj Yoga is not about such things. There is the matter of attraction and repulsion of the physical body or personality. Sense perception deceives the individual into believing that if they gain possession of something physically attractive, it somehow enhances their value as a person. Some forms of ego lead to vikar because ego is a reaction to stress. In that case, ego is not a vice. Religious and moral people focus on ego as something punishable. But administering punishment does nothing except intensify stress. It causes trauma in young children. Consequently, the religious, moral angle on life is the worst possible, leading to an oppressed, constricted, guilt and shame-based social world. It results in distortion and disempowerment of the soul. Reactions to that stress and trauma take the form of various addictions classified as vices by the religious or moral people. Other forms of ego are based on faulty social conditioning and education. Like some children are raised to believe they are superior to others on the basis of their skin color, musculature, social position, possessions. They are trained to be violent, abusive, misogynist, racist, and distorted in other ways through propaganda. To tell such a one that they should become humble is completely meaningless and ineffective. Many moral and religious people believe that humiliation makes a person egoless. However, it actually intensifies the ego problem and forces the victim into inferiority complexes and makes them even more defensive. All this is a product of the patriarchal system, and most of the world functions on this basis. The challenge is to extract oneself from this system while being immersed in it. Shiv Baba provides us with all the necessary thoughts and information that enables us to live in the midst of religiosity and moralistic authoritarian performers, and yet remain in self-respect, purity, independence, freedom, and immunity. The challenge is to become what you know. Knowing is important, but becoming requires immense spiritual power. Many BKs get accused of intellectual arrogance. What is this exactly? Ego is often referred to as a mask. It is a mask that covers spiritual, emotional, and social wounds, deflecting the attention of spectators away from the damaged self through gaining their attention on the performance. Intellectual brilliance is an effective performance mask that causes most spectators to become impressed and get taken in, losing sight of the wounded soul behind the mask. Intellectual brilliance, beauty, and talent is great and important, and certainly the soul-conscious person is endowed with virtues, specialities, and talents. So what is the difference? There is a difference in vibration. Vibration comes from the mind, insofar as the mind amplifies the expression of the soul. A soul in pain, with all the powers of endurance, accommodation, tolerance, etc., is not distorted. That soul has their self-respect, independence, and freedom. Such a soul has clear perception and is not deceived by anything going on in the drama that can be perceived through the senses. Such a soul is neutral. On the other hand, a soul in pain, when there is insufficient spiritual power, does not have full access to the powers of yoga, and therefore must use some form of ego mask to cover their suffering. In the case of using the ego mask of intellectual brilliance, the spectators will be impressed but not engaged, because they will have been slightly or greatly disempowered. When intellectual brilliance, beauty, and talents are expressed by the soul-conscious person, the spectators feel engaged, empowered, included, and strengthened in their sense of self. The good example of this is Dadi Prakashmani, whose greatness never made anyone feel small. What heals the wounded and corrupted soul? Making Gyan and Yoga a priority. Taking power from Shiv Baba. Performing pure karma. Catching the self, dropping into body consciousness or using ego masks, and bring the self back to soul consciousness. How? Noticing one's own vibration, remaining in your power, remembering who you are, keeping your mind filled with your relationship with God. Who do you talk to? Yourself and God. Talk to others from your essence. Gradually, the elements of your being become aligned. Ego masks are needed progressively less. Corrupt aspects of the soul erupt and give the impression of distress and negativity. This is to be endured. It means only that it is leaving you, nothing else. The mind must interpret such events accurately and remain unfazed. There is the matter of attraction and repulsion of the physical body. Sense perception deceives the individual into believing that if they gain possession of something physically attractive, it somehow enhances their value as a person.
Sister Denise, that's so deep. When I read it the first time yesterday, I was saying, Sister Denise like opened another dimension of the power of thought. So those are the impressions that I had. So we turn to you, and we would love to listen to more of elaboration on that.
I thought that it's probably a good idea for me to sort of go over it and go into a bit of detail about it, because I think it's a bit different from what we normally see. I know that I had a few responses from people who read it beforehand and who said, oh, we haven't heard about this before, so that means it's good for us to go over it. And thought is such a subtle thing, and we are used to in many ways not being really very subtle about how we approach Raj Yoga. And I remember in the years that I was spending time with Daddy Janki one-on-one, and she was really mentoring me. She used to say very often, look, this is very, very subtle. So the most important thing you have to do is work on bringing yourself to a more and more subtle state of consciousness so that you can perceive and grasp the subtlety of what this is. And so I think a lot of people do it in a relatively gross way. So I think our work together is also to bring ourselves to a more and more subtle state. And the problem with subtle states is that you can bring yourself into what seems to be a subtle state, but which is full of Maya. And this is also reflected in Baba's mention that when people go tripping off to the subtle regions, there's plenty of Maya over there. So this is a similar thing. And it is connected with the phenomenon of superstition. And superstition is very strong in India, and it's quite strong all over the world, but in India, very, very strong. So people tend to feel that if they put 2 and 2 together and make 480, that's somehow brilliant, but 2 and 2 means 4, not 480. Superstition can take many forms. You can get an idea, see an advertisement, hear something from someone, put it together and say, this is a sign. And occasionally it may be, but most of the time it isn't. But if you give importance to it, then it's like imagining yourself to be subtle when you're really not. So this is why, along with being subtle, we also have to be very grounded and very realistic. So that's a paradox in a way, and it's balance as well. Now, thought is not just having words going around in your head or repeating phrases from the Murli. That's a pretty gross form of thought. Thought is very, very subtle. Whatever you see and hear and remember and associate with, all of that moves extremely fast in your mind. And some of the thoughts that are happening, you will focus on and work with, but there are all sorts of other thoughts happening at the same time, which are kind of peripheral thoughts. So, there are some people, and they say this, I don't know how true it is, but they say women are very good in multitasking. That means you can hold many different thoughts at the same time and do many different actions at the same time. But as well as that, thoughts are consecutive. So you have to do things one after the other, but it just depends how fast you are. And I think traditional women who are in a context, social context, where they are expected to pay attention to lots of things. And you remember there was a song called I'm a Woman, which is all about all the things you have to do as a woman: look after the children, the husband, the in-laws, the cooking, the garden, the damage control, the emotional upsets of people, someone who may be sick, handle the shopping, and lots of things all at once. So, women are pretty used to doing that. And on the other hand, it is said that men, they have to do one thing at a time, and if they're busy doing something, do not interrupt them because it will break the concentration. And I think it may be true in many cases, but it's a fairly general thing. But just to give you an idea of the huge amount of activity that goes on in the mind, and you need to have spiritual strength in order to keep track of all these things and to decide what you're going to use and what you're going to discard. And your thoughts may come at you rather like these days. There are people who get 1,000 emails a day and they have to deal with them, but then that makes you crazy. So you get rid of most of them. But it's an indication of the sort of computing that the soul with brain has to do. And when people are spiritually weak, they have difficulty doing that. And when people are in very stressful circumstances, that will add to the difficulty. So in this write-up, I was trying to cover many, many things, but I'm aware that I think a lot of people are not used to how much we are dealing with all at one time. So a lot of time, people are what we call externalized. That means to say that their attention is on what you can perceive through your senses. So you are not so in contact with what your perception is doing to your inner world. And this is why Baba tells us very often, now you need to practice being internalized or introverted, or there's various different words for this, but it's all about being very conscious of what is happening in your mind while all these sense perceptions are going on. And a lot of the time you aren't aware, which means that the sense perception will trigger things that will have an impact on your consciousness that you are not aware of because your attention is on the outside. So when you're practicing Raj Yoga, you're shifting this situation and you're bringing the attention more and more to the inside so that you can be aware of a kind of triage that you can do in your mind and discard very rapidly things that are triggered that are not important as compared with things that are triggered that are important. For example, take self-doubt. One of the things that happens in social interaction is a lot of manipulation. And part of the manipulation involves using tried and tested methods to condition people to be susceptible to certain kinds of manipulation. It's a very complicated thing. And some people are very, very adept at it, because they are motivated in life by wanting to control people around them and to be in a dominant position. And so they will use tricks to disempower people. And if you are around people like that, you need to be very skilled in this particular game. So that you can defend yourself. And some people are very skilled at it and some people are not. And the thing is this, if you decide to become very skilled in this, all of your attention goes on that, and then your attention is not on other things, which actually puts you in a weak position. So you may not want to play that game, but there's a lot of people who do. So you need to be able to defend yourself. And this game is about getting people to doubt themselves. Because if you can get a person to doubt themselves, then you can manipulate them easily and wrap them around your little finger, as they say. So the methods for this are verbal abuse, accusations, comments about a person's value or appearance, or their honesty, or something like this. And so the language, we're using English, so the English language is tremendously distorted, and words, the meanings of words get changed in this process, and it begins when you are an infant. So that you are used to understanding the word like honesty to mean something very different from what it actually means. So, for example, this is very often used with women. They will say, oh, I will make you into an honest woman. That means an honest woman is somebody who is totally under the control of some particular guy. But that has no connection with honesty. But they will make you think that that's honest. So they will tell you, okay, if you're not honest, you're bad. And if you're honest in this particular way, you're good, but totally and completely disempowered, you see. So this is how this kind of manipulation goes on. And unless a person is able to completely separate themselves from this sort of game, they can be badly damaged by it. And it's ubiquitous. It's all over the place, and particularly in very misogynistic societies. And when people come into Raj Yoga, they do not necessarily remember their background, and they're not necessarily aware of their susceptibilities. Now, I'm just getting a message from Sister Rose about ego, not a bias, but a reaction to stress. And I will do that now, because it's very much something that happens in this game that I'm talking about. So when you come into Raj Yoga, you may be religious type of person, and you may have been conditioned through your whole life to assume that people who are experts, who are your teachers, who are in charge of the activities of Raj Yoga or the classes or something like that, and you will be inclined, you will have been conditioned to give away your power to people who are moral authorities. And they will tell you that greed, anger, lust, attachment, ego are vices. And now, if you look at these words carefully, you will find that, okay, they may be classified as vices, no doubt, but these are feelings. These are emotions. And so what they're telling you by saying your emotions are vices is you are not permitted to have emotions, because the emotions that you have make you a bad person. Then, on the other hand, you have the qualities, love, peace, bliss, purity and happiness and these kinds of things, you see. So if you display feelings and activities and signs that could be classified as that, then you are a good person, you see. So all of this creates artificial characters who are in many ways oppressed, and they're not really able to be real because they're equating being real with being bad. And this happens to people who are religious because religious moral authorities train people in this way. So you come from a religious experience or religious background into Gyan, you will bring all that baggage with you and you will have no idea that that's what you're doing because it's you're not conscious about it. Because it's your conditioning, it's your training, and you just shift from this religious circumstance to that religious circumstance, and you carry on like that. But that none of that is Raj Yoga, you see, but it's called Raj Yoga. So it creates confusion. Let me go to this mention that ego is not a vice, but a reaction to stress. So this word ego is defined differently by different people according to their conditioning, according to their education. If you've been raised in psychoanalysis, then ego is a good thing. If you've been raised in moral kind of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, or whatever, ego is a bad thing. So there's a discrepancy there between the psychological angle and the religious angle because they're using one word to mean two different things. And this is a problem of language because the language gets distorted according to use and we may say abuse. When Baba says body consciousness, that is what is called ego. Body consciousness, ego, is also called false ego. That means that you think you are, according to a sense of identity that you have been given by how you were raised. And when people are raised in a very moralistic situation where it's religious or punitive, which is a lot of the world, then you experience a lot of excessive punishment. It can be by words or by physical suffering and pain inflicted. But the person is deemed by the society to be bad, fundamentally bad, and that the parents, educators, and religious authorities have to make that person good. Now, if you look at people who do really, really bad actions, you will find in just about every single case that this person who behaves like that was raised in a extremely vicious and violent, unreasonable way, and that their behavior is actually a reaction to that. And so one needs to pay attention to it. For example, Brahma Baba said that no human being has any right for any reason to strike a child. This is God speaking. And what do people do? Totally the opposite, because they believe through their religious background that you have to. And so this is what I call the toxic conventional morality. So one thing that people don't do is take into consideration the extent to which they are distorted by the behavior of the people who make you believe that they are good and what they are doing is right. And this distortion has to be undistorted. But the reaction to all of this takes the form of what we call ego masks, because you have to protect yourself from that, and you have to get people to not violate you. And so some people become what the psychologists talk about as fight or flight or freeze. These are the reactions, and all of this is called ego. And calling it a vice means it's punishable, which means people have a right to damage you and then to damage you more when you react to that damage that they did in the first place. This is why I say that ego is a reaction to stress and not a vice. Because what do people do? They say, oh, you have ego, therefore you are bad. And in this way, they make the person doubt their natural responses, their natural self-defense responses. You see, so all of this creates a tremendous amount of disturbance in the minds of people. And it diminishes their ability to function effectively in the social world. And so this is very poisonous. And this is what Baba called in the Murli today, Maya's Mat, Maya's ideology. And so what God does when he comes onto this earth is he says, by the way, all of you, by the way, you are pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful beings of light. That is your identity. And what do the moral authorities tell you, including those people who learn Raj Yoga and then teach it, but who haven't undone the effect of their religious backgrounds? They will tell you you're a pure, peaceful, powerful, blissful, loveful being of light, but they will act towards you as if you are a person who needs to be corrected all the time. And they will, in the name of love, they will give you a hard time. And this creates moral confusion. It creates moral confusion in children, and it creates moral confusion and tremendous disempowerment in people who come into spiritual organizations in their adult years, because it takes you back to all that damage that was done in your childhood and amplifies it. And so this is something to be careful about. So if I just go through what I wrote here, just so that you can see how this works. So if you say thought produces vibrations and atmosphere around you and in the feelings of people in the vicinity. So what kind of thought are we talking about? How do you feel about yourself, who you are? You know, sometimes people feel okay, but it doesn't remain like that, because there may be something that happens and all of a sudden they feel not okay. So you are switching between the empowered sense of self to a disempowered sense of self. And this switch is triggered by external circumstances, which can be very tangible or they can be very intangible. And there are moments in everybody's life where a feeling just arises out of nowhere and you feel uncertain about yourself. And you don't know where it came from, but it's powerful and it can take over. And this is what gets people into a depressed state. And when you're in that kind of state, then the way that you interpret what's going on can amplify it. And so this is danger. So whenever you experience such a wave of thought where you feel uncertain about yourself, or you feel sad, or you feel like that for no very good reason, in Raj Yoga, what you need to do is, even though I feel this thing, I am actually a pure, powerful, peaceful, loveful, blissful being of light. And this feeling that I have, I do not need to give it any attention, because if I do, it's going to pull me down, and I don't have to allow that. So this is what you have to do. But a lot of people don't know this, and so they don't do it, and you have to catch it quickly. So Baba talks to us about Maya. And Maya is defined variously as delusion or illusion. And so when all of a sudden, maybe even this can be triggered by something somebody says, which is demeaning to you, and you will all of a sudden get pulled into this powerful sense of weakness, internal weakness, and lack of confidence. And so you have to immediately label that this is Maya, this is a delusion, this is not true. This is somebody who's triggering something that was not true anyway in the first place, and I do not go there. You see, and you have to really remind yourself that this is real. And that you have the right and the duty to yourself to defend yourself against such things that are triggered on deep down on the inside of yourself, and not to consider that just because you have a strong feeling that you have to let it take you over or go with it. You don't. You really don't. And especially someone in a position of authority around you may have discerned that you are susceptible to being disempowered in this way, and they will use words that will take you off balance and trigger this very easily. And you have to know the game that's going on and not get taken down. And that's just part of life skills. Because you know that everybody is basically a pure, powerful, peaceful, loveful being of light, but not everybody is soul conscious all the time, if hardly ever. And so you have to be fast. Sometimes Baba uses the word Tivra Purusharati, which is usually interpreted or translated as intense effort maker. But in fact, it's not intense, it's fast. So a fast effort maker is someone who will catch these triggers, whether they come from something deep within you, a trauma, an old wound, whatever it is. You have to be quick to recognize it, quick to act on it, and keep yourself stable and positive regardless of all of that. And this is not an easy thing to do, because people have been really strongly trained and conditioned to go into shame, guilt, depression, all sorts of negative states of mind, which they then have to cover with what I call an ego mask. So you may be feeling really awful inside, and you put on a good face, and you become like two different people. And which one is the real me? Well, it's supposed to be the fake one, and then the real one gets abandoned. And so when you abandon yourself, you are very, very vulnerable to manipulation. And that leaves you weak. And you have to be careful about that, because this is a very tricky game. And you are called spiritual warriors, and a spiritual warrior needs to understand we are at war. These are, something like bombs and grenades and whatnot that explode you and put you off balance. So you have to be fast at this. So this is why I said, even the slightest negative, weak, irrelevant, inappropriate, anxious or fearful or ego-based thought changes your relationship with the world around you, because instead of being in your power, you are in doubt, and you are thinking that you're not so valuable, not so important, not so good, and then you have to compensate for it. So this ego mask is like a compensation for something that's anyway not real, but which you think is real, but it isn't, you see. So this is quite tricky. And so when you are clear about these things, and you keep yourself in your reality, regardless of these very, very subtle upsets, then you're in charge of the drama. Otherwise, the drama can overwhelm you. And it just depends on the slight switching of your consciousness, which has to be done immediately upon the trigger. So that's called Tivra Purusharati, fast effort maker. So Raj Yoga provides detailed keys to the use and application of different types of thoughts, as well as methods to generate a pure and powerful mindset. So again and again, when you sit down in meditation, you need to do a variety of things when you're doing that. And the first thing you must do is bring yourself into soul consciousness, because Raj Yoga is about being in soul consciousness while interacting with body conscious people in a body conscious environment, which is not aligned with you, and which corresponds to what you left behind when you came into Raj Yoga. So it's very, very easy to pull you back into it. And because if you don't play that game, they will come to you from another angle and make out that you're weird and artificial and this and that and the other. So it can be very confusing, because you come into Raj Yoga and you are trying out things, and it takes a while for it to become really, really natural. If you think about it, you were in a soul conscious state for the first half of the cycle, but the second half of the cycle not. And the people who had been the highest in the golden age, by the time they get to the iron age, they are really lowest. And so you have this big journey to return back to your state of soul consciousness, which is a very high state. And you have many, many obstacles around you all the time. And this is not so easy Raj Yoga. Another meaning of Sahaj Raj Yoga, other than easy Raj Yoga, is you're doing this practice in the context of something which is totally opposite to it. And you have to get skilled in this practice while in the context of its opposite. Because if you don't do it in that context, you will acquire a skill which can be broken very easily, and that's not useful for you. So a continuous flow of meaningful thought and feeling energy. So that means the more you are on your inside of yourself, and the more you are in remembrance of who you are, and the more you are pulling in spiritual energy from Shiv Baba, from God, the more you're able to activate this real part of yourself and stay in your power, so that when anything comes around which wants to diminish you, which will be everything, you're sharp, you're fast, and you know how to defend and protect yourself, and you don't just give away your power as everybody would like you to do. So for that, you need to be aware of the pre-thought feelings and triggers. So you need to know what your traumas are, and what your karmic accounts are, and your conditioning, addictions, and the social attitudes that limit your freedom to be who you really are. And for that, you have to be really realistic. And a lot of people in Raj Yoga don't really understand the need to be realistic. And they say, oh, you should forget all that. But you can't actually forget it until you've worked through it. Then you can forget it. But if you avoid it and call that forgetting it, you will be under its influence the whole time. So this is where even the use of the word forget is a kind of distortion of what is really needed. So I think that most people have had all sorts of traumas, and it is said for Raj Yoga that you can't really come into Raj Yoga until you feel the need for it, and you feel the need for it when you've reached a state of disempowerment that is really uncomfortable for you, and you say, well, we don't want this anymore. We don't want to be in this state. This is not right. I need power. I need information. I need to figure out what's going on here. So you come into Raj Yoga and you get information which is diametrically opposed to the information that you get in the world, especially from the educational and religious and parental authorities. If your education is science, that's okay. But you have what's called as a moral education. And this moral education is supposed to be good for you, but a lot of the time it's really quite bad for you. But you can't tell the difference because you don't know. So it's really a lot of deep inner work to understand your traumas and the emotions connected with your traumas, and be very clear and honest about it. And this process of becoming honest about it allows you to see your ego masks that you normally use to cover up or to compensate for the wounds that you acquired on your journey through life before you come into Gyan. And another thing that is very common is that you get in Gyan, either in centers or on the service field or whatever, you get circumstances that are the same. Because you, as a human soul, need to get through your stuff. And if you have similar circumstances which were traumatic for you in your time before Gyan, and they reappear again during Gyan. Before Gyan, you didn't have the tools. Now you have the tools. So you get the similar circumstances which trigger the similar sanskaras and feelings and thoughts and sense of self. And so this is a circumstance in which you get to practice to use those tools. So you have to stand up for yourself, represent yourself, acknowledge to yourself, and let people know who you are, because they will project on you in the same way as others had projected on you and which you accepted, now don't accept. And so there's a lot of work, and it's deep inner work. And you have to do it while being stable. And in many ways, you're doing the work without anybody knowing that you're doing the work. And it's very, you can say, acute, because your feelings are raw at that time. And so you need a lot of power to process raw feelings in a public arena without anybody seeing what you're doing, because if they see what you're doing, they stick it to you. And so this is a big skill. It takes quite a bit of time to acquire this. And this is very, very powerful and deep work. But most of the people around you, especially even those who are in the practice of Raja Yoga, will not be aware of what's really going on here. And so you have to be functioning at many levels at the same time. It's a kind of multitasking in the midst of an environment, but always go back to your fundamental vibration of soul consciousness. And this, all the times where we're sitting for meditation, Amrita Vela, traffic controls, evening meditation, whenever you are meditating and studying, you are preparing yourself to go into the social arena where your weaknesses will be triggered. And your preparation of meditation is an accumulation of power, which allows you to feel those things without reacting to those feelings. And in that way, you are becoming neutral. And this is a way of becoming free from the karma. It's a sort of karmatit stage. When you get wounded by someone else's bad behavior, you may say, oh, they did a bad karma, so they are going to suffer for it. Okay, that's very superficial level. But you experienced pain from somebody else's bad karma. That experience is also your bad karma. Not that you did something bad to be punished for, but no, you experienced a wound, you took that wound into yourself, and it weakened you. So now you have to strengthen yourself and unwound yourself. This is a very deep thing. So this is work. Now, thought is produced by the soul and emerges from the mind. So Baba talks to us about the mind, the intellect, and the sanskaras as subtle organs of the soul. Just as the body parts are organs of the body. So your eyes, ears, nose, fingers, tongue, whatever, which can detect sense perceptions, these are organs of the body, sense organs. Your mind is a sense organ of the soul, which detects and registers feelings, things that are very, very subtle. And also the soul itself is impacted by these traumas and different kinds of bad things that you did, but mostly bad things that other people did to you. These are registered in the soul, and they're wounds, and they have to be healed. And so when something will trigger those wounds, it affects the soul, and then the soul will react to that impact, and that will be expressed through the mind or the intellect or the sanskaras or all three. So it's very important to make a distinction between the soul itself, the organs of the soul, mind, intellect, sanskaras, and then your performance in the material world. So this is why Baba talks about you being a master of the three worlds, the incorporeal, which is where the soul is, the subtle, where the mind, intellect, and sanskaras are, and the physical, where you do your actual performance in the world and interacting with people. And most people in Raj Yoga, they don't really think about it like this, but it's very useful to do that, because then you can do work at a much more refined level. So, different kinds of thoughts, ideas. Now, normally people think ideas come from the intellect, feelings come from the mind, interpretation of perception. Some people think, as Vanji was saying, that perception is itself an interpretation, but I am using the word perception not in that way, although it's often used in that way. I'm using the word perception to mean what you, the soul, are perceiving through your mind and through your sense organs, and then the effect that that has on you. That's another level of perception, where you can take it as something good or something bad or something dangerous or whatever. There's an interpretation there. But then there's another level of interpretation, which is, what does it mean really? And what are you going to do about it? So you may perceive danger and it triggers fear, but then it goes to the intellect, which says, okay, fear, fine, but then what are we going to do about it? What's the level of danger? Is my fear alerting me to which level of danger it is? I have to be extra careful, but it requires me to act, you see. And so then the intellect has to be working to see, okay, what bit of jnana am I going to use? What bit of life experience am I going to use to deal with this situation effectively? And circumstances and situations come up of a similar type again and again, because where you have a trauma, where you have a wound, there is a distortion in the soul, and the only way that distortion can be righted is by really being totally immersed in that situation again and again and again, until you become so neutral about it that it doesn't have power over you. You can feel the totality of it in such a way that you position yourself to give a response to it, which is exactly the right thing. And this is why in the Gita, yoga is defined as skill in action. And you cannot have skill in action unless you're absolutely in command and in control of the situation. So this is like football. Everybody, lots of people interested in football, and we had the World Cup, and this great footballer was in perfect control of the ball, and everybody is very engaged and impressed and taken up by the skill of that footballer. And sometimes Baba had said that, look, Maya is coming to you as a ball. It's kicked to you. Now you have to catch that ball, be in control of it, be in control of the, have a sense of where all the other players are, what they're going to do, what's happening in their minds, so that you play your shot accurately and you get the goal. This is what yoga is about. And not everybody realizes this. So now, and there are other things, all these other things that are going on in the mind, your memories. Now, your memories, which are very potent, are the traumas, because they are shocks. And whenever there's a shock to the system, it's like a damage. And so when you have a damage, then you have a reaction to the damage. So these memories can make you respond or react inappropriately, and you have to reshape your relationship with the memories so that they don't put you in a disempowered condition. Assumptions and prejudices are all connected with your how you were raised as a child, and how you were educated in your school and in your religious environment. And so people have many assumptions, all connected with morality, what's good, what's bad, who's what's important, what's stupid, what's intelligent. All of these are just absorbed from the external social and intellectual environment, and there may be a great deal of falsehood in that, and you assume it to be true, and it's not. So you have to rethink everything that you assume. That's another piece of work. Emotions. Emotions and vices are usually considered as the same thing. And so you have a tendency to lock them up. And then, of course, they're going to explode. And so you need to disconnect vices and emotions. And this is why I think it's really quite inappropriate to use the word vice for greed, anger, lust, attachment, and ego. And instead, consider these as feelings, emotions, urges, and you have these, and these are, you might say, I want something, and what you mean is, I need it. But somebody else will say, well, if you want it, that means you're greedy. And this is where there's such a mix-up of the use of language, and people's assumption of what words mean is quite much used in this manipulation game that I was talking about earlier. And so therefore, when you're communicating with somebody, you need to understand the extent to which their use of the language is distorted, and you have to provide for that so that you understand each other. And that is very often a big problem. And this is a cultural issue. Different cultures which speak the English language speak it so differently that there's a great deal of miscommunication that happens, because language is something living, and it is it assumes different meanings by different people who use it in different places at different times. And when you have a big mix of cultures, which we do have in this world, then you get a lot of miscommunication because of people thinking that this word means this, finding it means something else. And even now the dictionaries are very, I think, to blame in some of this, because they will take how an English word is used in America and assume that that's universal, and it doesn't mean the same thing in England, it doesn't mean the same thing in Australia, it doesn't mean the same thing in India. And so it's an issue that we have to just be aware of, and sometimes define your terms is quite a useful thing to do. Now, one thing that I did mention is that inaccurate interpretation of perception is due to lack of power of discrimination. And this power of discrimination is developed very slowly over the years due to experience, refinement of your yoga power, and it's a deep thing to be able to be really neutral, really clear, really understand everyone and everything that's going on around you, and select what's real and discard all the bits that are unreal. Now, I'm looking at the time and seeing that I've taken quite a lot of time, haven't got very far down this document, but maybe this is a good time for me to just refer back to Vanji.
Okay, thank you so much, Sister Denise, for elaborating and breaking down for us the different aspects of the material that was posted.
So go deep inside and feel your essence. Feel your purity, your integrity. Your peace. And know that you are very good. Even if you're wounded, it's temporary. Just feel yourself still and deep like the ocean, capable of big storms, but deep down, still, quiet and deep. Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you, Sister Denise.